1, 2, 3.
The following is a Laura Flanders Show audio exclusive.
Community development. It's a puzzle. Nowhere we can think of has done it perfectly. Choose any city and you'll find issues. But one thing's for sure, the people who live in a place are the ones most keenly aware of what's needed there, and yet they are usually the ones with the least decision-making power about how their communities develop and change, especially when they're poor or people of color. Majora Carter grew up and came of age in the 1970s in the South Bronx in New York, one of this country's toughest places at one of its toughest times. Since then, her neighborhood's seen billions of dollars of investment from all the usual sources, but very little of that has lifted up the people who live in her neighborhood. More often, it's displaced them or cast them as a problem to be fixed. Majora Carter long ago waded into this fray, deciding not to leave, but to stay and to do development differently. A self-described, quote, chick from the hood with zero experience in real estate, over the last 30 years, she's led a fight against a proposed waste management facility, spearheaded the creation of a new riverfront park. She started her own consulting firm, received a MacArthur Genius Award and a Peabody for her podcast. And in 2017, she and her husband launched the Boogie Down Grind Cafe, a hip-hop themed cafe in Hunts Point, the Bronx, that survived and even thrived during COVID with a bit of help from Beyoncé. Her book, Reclaiming Your Community, You Don't Have to Move Out of Your Neighborhood to Live in a Better One, is just out from Berrett-Koehler. Majora Carter, welcome to the program. I'm glad to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Congratulations on the book and so much more. We're going to get into all of it. But we have to start where I think probably our audience last saw the Bronx, which was in news footage of a fire just this January. Tragic. Killed, I think, 17 people, 8 kids. As you watched that, 77, years since 1977 when the Bronx was said to be burning, what went through your head?
First of all, just in prayers for the people that made it out and serious concern for the families that lost people, because there were many. It definitely touched people that I know. So that was a problem. It didn't remind me of, the kind of, what we went through during the era of the burning Bronx, because that was this was a tragic accident. What happened in the Bronx in the 1960s and 70s was actually the manifestation, of the kind of policies, whether it's redlining, horribleness in the banking industry, lack of capital to communities that like the South Bronx. That was like the manifestation of, I think, systemic racism and how it actually worked on the ground in our communities.
At the same time, it did sound like there was poor maintenance, bad fire escapes, poor people clumped together with very little upkeep and care. Not enough has changed, and that's part of the point of your book, clearly. But just to remind people, who perhaps have only that image of the Bronx, it only makes it into their news when some disaster or tragedy hits. Tell us what else they need to know to fill out the picture.
Well, there have been some amazing changes here in the Bronx, and a lot of it was actually, the good stuff, frankly, was actually led by people from our community, which is what my book is about. It's called Reclaiming Your Community. You don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one. And it is literally about our approach to community development, which is talent retention. And we sort of borrowed that idea from the business world, where like a company doesn't hire people, pours training dollars into them and all sorts of stuff so they can go work for somebody else. They want them to impact the bottom line, of their company. But in American low status communities, which is a phrase that I use, and I'll happy to explain it. It's basically people sort of know what that means when they hear it. It's the kind of places where there's, low educational attainment, higher rates of poor health outcomes. Even more people are involved in the justice system. They're the kind of places where inequality is essentially assumed, by people both inside and outside the community. And you see it in terms of the kind of economic developments that are there as well. More liquor stores and health clinics, very high amounts of very subsidized low-income housing and homeless shelters, things like that. And that's where you'd see those places. But again, it's inequality is assumed in those places. And yeah.
Well, but I want you to tell us a little bit about the other side of the picture.
Yes. So the other side of that, what happens in our communities is that, we've been led to believe that you need to measure success by how far you get away from our communities. It's almost as if we see brain drain happening here. Like the most talented ones within our communities are the ones, there's all sorts of programs, to sort of help them get out of here. And so whether they're, artistically or creatively or academically, athletically gifted, there's an expectation that you're going to grow up and measure success by how far you get away from there. And I know that because I was one of those kids.
Yeah. Did you grow up thinking that you would stay there?
Of course not. I grew up being told literally and telling myself I am, I've got a good brain. I'm going to get out of here. And my teachers said so, my mom and dad said so. And it was just yeah. And, and growing up, I often say I was planning my escape when I hit 7 years old, when at the beginning of the summer, I watched both buildings at either end of my block burn down. And at the end of the summer, my brother was killed, and because of the gang violence here. And I was I'm out, I'm going to use education and to get out. And I did. But what we've been seeing, especially over the past several years, are that the talent within our community, all those strivers, the ones that are told and are expected to kind of move out once they make it, are staying here, opening up businesses and being a part of the culture that is a part of our community. They are totally dismissing this idea that the nonprofit industrial complex places on us, that poverty is a cultural attribute and neighborhood preservation is basically what's done in terms of development in places like this, that essentially says, well, this is what this community is. Again, inequality is assumed. So we're not going to set up the conditions for the talented ones to stay. We're going to make sure that they get out of here. And that's that.
You use the term, and you've used it here, you use the term low status to refer to communities that other people perhaps are used to hearing referred to as low income. Can you talk about why?
Yeah, low status was a phrase that I heard that I thought it took it away from just the idea of income, but really put it on the equality spectrum, because it's the kind of places where inequality is assumed by people both inside and outside of those communities. And it's whether or not, and they might look different depending on the community that you're in, but ultimately it's the kind of places where low health outcomes, are rampant, where there's more opportunities, for people to have lower educational attainment, higher rates of people in the justice system. And the architecture of those places also looks like, you know it when you see it. There are more liquor stores in those places. There are more homeless shelters. There's more poverty in general. And those places are the kind of where people just assume, whether it's our government, the nonprofit world, people in our community assume that that's what's happening.
So where has all that money gone? Let's start there. I mean, if you can still have buildings burning, and you're right, the situation's not the same, but it's not good enough. It's not different enough today, given how many billions, you write, have been poured into the South Bronx. Right. Where has that money gone? Right. Well, and where has it come from? I say it comes from the usual sources, but you want to lay them out?
Yeah. I mean, as you know, billions of philanthropic and government dollars go into certain neighborhoods, but, they'll go to things like very highly subsidized affordable housing, where there's homeless shelters and for housing for very low income goes there. Pharmacies and healthcare, the lifestyle illnesses that are being also paid to treat those kind of conditions, from diabetes and heart conditions, as opposed to really treating the action. They sort of treat the symptoms as opposed to the causes of what's actually happening in those communities. And so we continue to concentrate, whether it's health clinics and pharmacies, affordable rental housing, those are the kind of things that we see. So yeah, lots of money is going into those places, lots of it.
You have a problem with pharmacies and community centers?
Well, when it's pretty much the major, and when it's the major way for folks for billions of dollars of economic activity to come into a community that's basically not there to support people's economic trajectory. Yeah, I do have a problem with it when it's banking on, the fact that the case that there's more opportunities for the people that are providing those services versus the people who are actually getting them, and we're not seeing any improvement in health outcomes or educational attainment or anything like that in those communities because we continue to concentrate poverty there. Yeah, I have an issue with that.
So really, there's no trajectory in mind. There's fixing people in place in mind. And that's what you write about. And that's what you say that you felt in those times when you were thinking about coming or going from the Bronx. Talk about what got you to stay, what committed you to the place, and what you love about it.
Well, I wasn't trying to come back to the Bronx, but I had, started my graduate program at NYU, and I needed a cheap place to stay, and the cheapest place was my old bedroom at my parents' house. Period. And but once I got here, I got connected to this amazing young man who had actually started a community center, actually an arts program in the community, and it really. I had no idea there were that many creative and artist folks like in the South Bronx. And I was one of them. So I was just like, oh my gosh. And so that kind of made me want to stay. And because suddenly I found a tribe. But then, I realized that the city was planning on building a huge waste facility on our waterfront. And we had already handled an enormous amount of waste services and other types of, noxious, environmentally burdensome places. And that's when I realized like all the arts and creativity in the world is not going to save us. And that's when I started, recognizing that here I was, this person who left the community because I was told I could do better things outside of it. And, but I was struck with a really harsh realization that this happened because what's happening to our community because we happen to be poor people of color and thus politically vulnerable. And I was like, oh, I can pretend I don't see that and just move on, or I can be a part of the change I wanted to see in my own community.
Now, it hasn't been easy, and you write about how it hasn't been easy, because you have been trying to sort of spearhead a different path. Mm-hmm. And you got in particular trouble using the word self-gentrification, which wasn't your term in the first place, but got you into trouble. Can you talk about why and how you think about that term today?
Yeah, I think it was just the gentrification part, that people, it's just a trigger word for folks, even though self-gentrification, many that got it were just like, oh my gosh, that makes perfect sense. And just who, as far as I know, created the term. It was his name was President Ronald Carter, who was the head, no relation, but who was the head of a historically Black college down in Charlotte called Johnson C. Smith University. And they did something that I thought was amazing. The college worked with some financial partners and some local developers, literally right outside, where the college was located. And they started working on development. Like the college actually used its access, to these bankers to help the people in the local community. And they worked together and it was amazing. And, but everybody wasn't in on that, from the community. And of course they saw development, and because to so many, people within, lower status communities, any kind of development, of course, could not possibly be done by us, because that's just the narrative that's often presented. And so they just assumed that it was somebody trying to gentrify them. And so they said so. And Dr. Carter was like, no, like, look who's doing this work. It's people from your own community. And if anything, it's self-gentrification. It's not gentrification. It's like, this is development that's by us and for us. And so I love that phrase. And I thought, oh my goodness, this makes perfect sense. And again, initially, a bunch of folks really got it. And they were just like, yeah, we like nice things too. Why do we have to wait for the neighborhood to have folks come from outside the neighborhood to get better? Why can't we enjoy what's here? It's like, yeah, I want a better neighborhood. Yeah, like here. And so, but then there were definitely others who were like, oh, she's just gentrifying it. And I'm like, no. And it was fascinating because I think some people just heard gentrification and that was it. But we don't even use it anymore because it's just too much. And it just gets in the way of, I mean, look, the people who want to have a conversation will have a conversation no matter what. But I don't want to give anybody a reason not to have a conversation about it just because like it's triggered some kind of crazy emotions in them that you can't move beyond. So we just like took it out of our mental dictionary.
Well, so to come back to the idea of reclaiming a community, you don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one. Let's just dwell here for a little bit because it's complicated. And I've been in the last few years, I think since we last saw each other, to a lot of places that were wrestling with this, whether it was New Orleans after Katrina, where they said, this isn't recovery, what we're seeing here, it's removal of the people who've lived here. Or Baltimore, where you saw, a rebellion after a police killing really try to raise the issues of development in a community. And I remember somebody saying to us on the show, it's not that we don't want development here. We just want to have a piece of it, a part in it, some say. So how do you facilitate that say when government could say, well, we have community boards, we have surveys, people just don't show up to the meetings?
Well, no, that's nothing. I mean, I would add what they want is equity, period, as in the money, like not the equity the way progressives talk about it, because that doesn't create wealth for anybody. The problem is that we've got this huge wealth gap, based on the fact that there were entitlement programs, starting from the 1600s for white folks in this country that people of color didn't get straight up. So it's real easy, to say, and I hear this a lot, like, oh, there's, we want to hear your input into development. It's like, no, how about we you help set us the access to capital so that we can actually do it. So how about you get rid of some of the racist, ridiculous standards that allow us to make sure that we don't participate in it and do something like that? How about, there's, I find it so crazy. Let's see that there's an opportunity here for people to think about things like why do we it's made it so possible for folks that did have access at homes, through really hard times. And why is it so easy for predatory speculators to come in and pick that off of people? Right? Because many times people don't really understand the value of their own property. That's one thing that we are actively trying to do. And the part of it is just we often we don't often, no one's letting it happen. But I think if you think about it, the way that predatory speculators have actually created, we're just a piece, communities like ours are literally, we're like a little line item on their spreadsheets.
So having persuaded you, people who live in the community, that they're worth nothing, their property's worth nothing, because look, this is how it gets treated, then you come in and say, I'll give you nothing for it, and that'll seem like something. But the developers do have a plan, and they do see value in there.
Developers absolutely have a plan. So to the little old lady, who lives in a neighborhood that's a low status community and who's been watching it not get any better. So when someone shows up at her door and says, I can buy your house for cash, she's like, in this old crappy neighborhood? Okay, I'll take it. No. I'll move back to the islands or wherever. And, but we don't, because I think that's one of the problems that we have, that we're not supporting our own communities to actually be able to own. And instead we're talking about, they just need another program, or maybe they'll provide some input into another developer who comes here. No. And that's why the wealth gap is as large as it is, and why it will keep growing unless we're actually addressing this.
So the other story that we did recently was follow the mayoral bid of India Walton in Buffalo, who had risen to to public consciousness through her work with a land trust. On the ground in Buffalo, I found a lot of ambivalence about land trusts. They seem like a great thing from one point of view, taking land out of the speculative market, putting a cap on the capacity of an owner to flip their property. They can make some money, but not too much. But to people in Buffalo, it was a real sense of why should our ownership be limited? Even people who didn't own houses yet. Can you talk about how you think about land trusts? And then I know that there's another project that we're about to do a piece on that you're interested in, and I'd love to talk about that too. But we're trying to get to models that you think work, and land trusts get a lot of attention these days.
They do. And I'm kind of with the folks who were ambivalent about them, in Baltimore. Why it's a tool. And I think on some level, yes, we should, it's not like just dismiss them, but don't just say, oh, that's all they need down there. Because if there are let it be a tool, in a toolbox versus that's the only thing they can do. Like, why can't folks, actually use the same exact tools that white families used in order to build, their generational wealth?
So a real GI Bill for everybody?
Real would have helped in a tremendous amount. So I think that's a helpful thing. Literally 100 deals, real deals with real money go down while like community groups are just talking about land trusts. It's like one of those things like keep busy on this side while they like the grown folks do work over here. That's what's happening.
One person in Buffalo said, why don't they do a land trust downtown?
Hello, exactly.
Why are they doing it in the commercial real estate area?
Yeah, so no.
So I love the idea of a toolbox with lots of different tools. What other tools do you want to see in there? And then I want to talk about, of course, the Boogie Down Cafe. So talk first about some of the tools that might help. We've got a new administration coming in the city with Mayor Eric Adams. We have a governor running for re-election, Kathy Hochul in the state. What tools do government agencies have at their disposal to do the kind of work that you're talking about?
This would be, I think, something that would just transform our communities. The same way that if you commit or accused of committing a crime, then you get, if you don't have access to counsel, the government will provide you with one. 6-figure real estate deals go down in communities like the South Bronx every other day. When predatory speculators show up at the homes of people that don't really understand their asset or how to use it, and basically cut a deal that is often for far less than what that house is worth. And they could actually use the equity in that house to do all sorts of things. But instead, our government all over this country, locally, everywhere, just lets those kind of deals go past the Department of Finance with nobody says a word about the fact that literally no one says, like, are you sure you know what's happening here? Like that literally this asset that you're selling for far less than it's worth, because we could see some of the tax records that some of the sales that have happened around here. Do you know that this is what it's worth, or something like that, just so to let people know? But instead, they just pass muster, they just go right away. And essentially what happens is that family's asset is just lost.
So I'm hearing public real estate defenders. Good idea.
I'm totally going to write that.
And then what about financial institutions? What exist and what do you need? And what have you used for your work?
I was my own bank. I literally took, I made every mistake possible. I didn't use other people's money, mostly because I just didn't know a lot of it. And I fortunately, I used all the funds from my consulting practice and invested it in what we were doing. And so I literally just got some of my very first bank financing, just a year and a half ago, like just before COVID. So that was sort of helpful for our cafe and some other things. So that was great. But, I do think that if there was more opportunities for for banks to kind of look more, I think, deeply at like what creates what's a good risk, then they would see that there's like the same way that Grameen International actually looked at alternative ways of assessing someone's risk and their ability to pay back something. That's, I think, is going to be really interesting to support people as they start thinking about asset development for their own projects. And so that's really good.
All right. So now I'm hearing public defenders for land, public land defenders, assets, real asset assessments of value, what actual value exists in a place. Heck, if you mentioned culture in the South Bronx, you'd see them soar to the top of the charts. What about that question of self-perception, of culture, of talent in a place? Because it doesn't feature anywhere on anybody's application form the talent that's in their family, in their bones, in their community.
Right. And that's what I think, in terms of the brain drain that our communities experience, like they do see it, but again, they tend to take it out of the communities they were born and raised in. What we're trying to do is help people see that talent was actually nurtured in a community like ours. And it would be amazing if we could actually take it back and work to create more opportunities for us to benefit from their talent, and also for others to see the future of others that look just like them, doing this kind of work. So I think that's what's super important, about it as well.
So that takes us to the Boogie Down Grind. Talk about it. Where'd the idea come from? How did you raise the money? And how did you sort of ride the waves of COVID?
Yeah. So we had actually acquired like 2 pretty inexpensive leases. And our goal, because we did all sorts of surveys, as an early real estate developer, we just asked folks like, what were they leaving the community for, to where do they spend their money? What were their hopes and dreams and aspirations for the kind of community they wanted to live in? And what came back were things like cafes and bars and restaurants and cool places to hang out. And so we acquired these 2 pretty cheap leases, from a landowner in the community. And we tried to get a coffee shop to come in. And, like we won't say the name of the really big one, who's basically said, no, that market's too emerging. And so they didn't come, and we couldn't find anybody else to open up a cafe. So we decided to do it ourselves. And so, yeah, it was all our money that we, had saved up, and plunked down into this place. Had no idea what we were doing. Fortunately, we got a partner to help us open it up on the coffee side, which is Birch Coffee, and they own plenty of stores in Manhattan. And but then we realized that what we needed to go our separate ways, and they're still amazing. But that's when we decided that we were going to literally, like, as the kids say, put some stank on it, and really like go back to our culture, which is the South Bronx, and it's hip hop. I mean, this is the birthplace of it. So we decided to call it the Boogie Down Grind, and really make it an homage, to the creativity and the talent that in the community that literally birthed hip hop, the cultural phenomenon that it is, but it's ours, literally. I mean, we share it with everybody, but it's ours. And so the nice thing about that was that once we built this beautiful space, and and it came, and so we'd like literally plastered the walls with the like early hip hop albums, and it was just super fun and really kind of cool. And and that's when the community, seemed to be enticed to stay, because there was someplace cool that literally spoke to them, and that they were allowed to be their best selves. As a matter of fact, it was insisted upon. So there were people decided to come and do open mics and credit repair workshops, book readings, music events. I mean, it was this tiny little space. And it was really, really awesome to have something like that, where folks were just sort of like, I didn't know we could do something like this in the neighborhood. And they came. Then COVID hit, and I was just like, oh my God, what's going to happen here? And because we'd been at it for a couple of years at that point, and we were just at the point where it's just like, okay, we're gonna like actually be in the black this year, and then COVID happened, and then we were like, well, maybe not this year. And but we ended up we closed down like everybody else did for a while, but we got a grant from Beyoncé's foundation, and we decided to use it to make some outdoor seating. Because, especially during 2020, you couldn't really be, inside. We had very low occupancy rates. And so then we took all of that activity outside. And we literally like hung, artists' work, from between a lamppost and a tree. And, it was an outdoor, exhibition like every other day. We put a microphone on the corner and folks would come and do all their artistic things. It was truly amazing. And it was so beautiful because one of the things that makes me super happy about that was that, people were just like, coming up to us and saying things like, I haven't heard that much joy on that street corner in years. And I was like, yeah, like y'all did that. I mean, we just made the space, but the community filled it, and their joy is what's overflowing out of it.
You do mention in the book that a year after the Boogie Down Grind, or maybe it was a couple of years, opened, and that aforementioned coffee chain that had turned you down in the beginning came back around, they were now looking indeed to open their own. Mm-hmm. So how do you think about that? And how do you address the fact that it's inevitable that developing a place develops the interest of outsiders in coming and mining what's there?
And that's to be expected. However, what's super important here, is that, what we want to do is retain the talent and then create more opportunities for ownership by people there, because there will be folks coming in. But if we can kind of set the conditions so that the talent that's already there can also participate, then we have a community. We have a much more, economically diverse ecosystem that creates opportunities for people that are already there, who can then, be like, okay, yeah, we know this aforementioned, chains here, but guess what? There's another one, that wants to do this.
So does that look like economic diversity requirements, regulations? What?
I wouldn't say requirements or even regulations. I mean, I feel like right now in the more concentrated poverty, or poverty prone areas within, definitely New York, it almost is legislated, because that's where you see such huge amount of publicly subsidized, housing. The developers are doing it, not because out of the kindness of their hearts, because they love poor people. It's like there's huge developer fees in it.
Yeah.
Like that's why it happens. And so I think that so we don't need to necessarily create another like legislative lane for that. What we really need are just opportunities for people within our own community to be a part of the ownership trajectory. Sometimes it's as simple as keeping the family's home within the family. And, and I could say that like, because my own family didn't keep my family home. And that's still like, it's so painful, to me. But the thing is, I think we've got an opportunity to sort of like create more of an understanding that if we just keep what we got, that's actually a good way to start the trajectory for many folks in our communities to build generational wealth locally.
So you're talking about a different model for community development. You're also talking about a different model of community investment. Investment by community members in community facilities and enterprises and businesses. And one that you have kicked off is a project you're calling Bronxlandia. And it's in an old, beautiful, abandoned train station. Who can be part of that? Who is part of that so far? And what's your vision there?
So the SEC did a really wonderful thing where they changed their regulations that allowed for just non-accredited investors. So those are investors that actually make
They did it after a lot of organizing and activism and pressure.
Absolutely. So I'm glad they did it, and thank you for all your work. Because what it did do was create the opportunity so that just not only super wealthy, rich people with lots of assets under their belt could invest in real estate and other types of business projects, but ones that were not, but who wanted the same kind of proportional rate of return for their money to be in those deals. And that I think was just an amazing thing to happen. We actually used, a crowdfunding campaign when we reopened the Boogie Down Grind, in part because it was just like, could we have a little bit of cushion, which would be great. But the other piece was like, we wanted people to see that this is something that happens. And most folks were just like, wait, we can invest? Like, that's not something we do. And it's just like, well, you can now. And so we're also doing the same kind of investment strategy where we're building. I mean, it's a much bigger project. It's going to be a $2 million redevelopment where we're taking this historic, Cass Gilbert designed rail station. It's the same one, the same architect that did the Woolworth buildings, one of my favorite buildings in the world. And so he did these little rail stations, yours truly actually acquired one a few years ago, and we're going to transform it into an event venue. And the acoustics in it are already, like right now, super hot. So it's good. So I want it to be like the best music venue ever. And it's going to be, that's my prayer. But so what we're doing is a part of our capital stack is definitely going to be, part of the, for a crowdfunding investment platform where we'll give an opportunity to folks, for as little as like about $250, have a stake, within the development of Bronxlandia.
So just to circle back, it used to be if you wanted to be an investor in a new business, you had to be what the Securities and Exchange Commission called a certified investor. And that meant that you were willing to invest, I think it was a $2,000 bottom threshold. It might have been a bit less than that. But that kind of cut out all your friends and relations if they wanted to help you start something. That rule got changed in the last few years, and that has really opened up possibilities.
Yes. For our crowdfunding investment strategy that we did for the cafe, our floor was $100, and we raised $50,000. And I would say the bulk of the 120 some odd investors had put in under $300. So that makes me super proud that enough folks were interested in supporting, a local, very local project. But they also got a chance to actually invest, period. And it was often their first time ever doing anything like that.
Well, it's a beautiful set of initiatives, and it's exciting to watch. I'm glad that we've remained in touch over the years and that we will, with any luck, be able to see this Bronxlandia kick off and be there on the opening night. I want to thank you, Majora, for all that you're doing. Go ahead.
We did like a little sneak peek of what Bronxlandia could be back on December 11th when because James and I actually started the initial demolition and filled the first 30-yard dumpster, for like all the almost 70 years of really bad construction was inside that building, and we ripped it down to the walls. But then we had a pop-up shop during the day. The actor Malik Yoba screened his series called I Build New York. It's the real estate mixtapes. It's all about, the history of real estate development in New York City. And then in the evening, it was both a hip hop and a rock showcase. It was pretty hot. So
all right, I'll come to the next opening. I want to end by just coming back to the beginning. We often ask on this program, what is it that leads you to believe, or not just believe, but was there ever a moment in your life where you felt that the changes you believe in are not just possible, but happening? And I want to ask you about that in this moment. The Bronx has yet to emerge from its categories at the bottom of health indices and inequality indices and poverty indices. COVID has only made things worse. You have a different vision. You're not alone. You need help, need things to change. What experience has given you a taste that it's happening?
Gosh, I have so many experiences that remind me that things are changing and that they've always been right there, because we took the time to recognize that our community was filled with talented people. We just needed to give it a place to see itself. And because reclaiming it involves retaining the talent that's already there to improve their own surroundings and their own economic future, because there's always been value in our communities, and we know that we could and should aspire to something that's economically and emotionally and spiritually meaningful to ourselves. We just have to give ourselves the opportunity to do that.
I think we have what we need. We kept you longer than we said. My only question is whether you want to go back to the very beginning. Just for one answer, in the sense that was deep, that fire happening. And people did see it on TV. And it was your classic, heartbreak story. And I bet, well, I anyway, felt both sad and furious that this was still friggin' happening after all this time and all this money and all this awareness. It reminded me of that building in London, the same thing. It's like, how dare you? You've been receiving warnings for a gazillion years, and yet you let this slide because those people didn't matter. How dare you? And that investigation has, in the UK, in London, has really sparked a lot of change. But this one, I'm just not sure if it will. And I don't know the details. You know them better than I. But just as a person watching it, you want to just share what was going through your mind?
Look, my heart went out to the people that were there. And, and just knowing the little that I knew about, some of the buildings up there wasn't the best. But the bottom line is we've got a lot of those buildings, right? And that in and of itself should tell us something about what's the kind of quality of life we expect people in communities like the South Bronx to be living in. And is that the best we can do? The answer for that would be no. And that's why I think it's so important to really think about opportunities that we, as folks who are from those communities, to really be in the space where they're building more for themselves, the kind of future that they want to create versus what's expected to happen in those communities. Because there is something in between, gentrification that displaces us and poverty level economic maintenance, as evidenced by like the quality of some of those buildings that we still have in this borough. And to me, it's talent retention, making sure that we've got the tools to redefine and redevelop a future that we want to be in.
That was great. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.